Hi, and this is the Physics High podcast. A quick quiz. Do you A, want to be inspired by science communicators? B, want to learn all about science education? C, want guidance on your scientific journey? Well, how about D, all of the above? Today my guest is Neil Atkin, and Neil Atkin is an educator based in Wales. Now he's educated both teachers and students for over 30 years. Now he's taught in a variety of diverse types of educational systems, from the poorest of the poor in, for example, Sierra Leone, to the very most challenging schools in a variety of different countries. Needless to say, he has a very diverse experience, and therefore he has a lot to offer us today. Now, about 7 years ago, he started a charity called Rubbish Science. Now, Rubbish Science is a program that in essence basically turns rubbish into useful items, particularly in developing countries. Items such as fly traps, gardens, and other useful items that those communities can then sell for an income. Now, the aim of Rubbish Science is threefold. One is to build those things so that therefore that community can grow and develop. Secondly, it's also to raise the scientific literacy within the community as he employs good scientific methodology in his programs. And finally, his program also empowers those communities. As they themselves are innovative, he teaches them good scientific processes to develop those innovations so that they themselves can produce the things that will build up their community. In essence, he makes science authentic. Welcome, Neil.
Hi.
So Neil, I gave the audience a little bit of an introduction of what you do, but I really just skated the surface. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do and what Rubbish Science is all about?
Okay, well, basically, the pandemic has kind of put things on hold, which is quite bizarre because in terms of Rubbish Science, we actually had an activity which was how could you actually possibly survive given just what was available on a rubbish dump if there was a pandemic. We've been running these ones for a couple of years. So the whole ethos of Rubbish Science is about going back to scientific literacy. It's about how can we make decisions based on scientific thinking using only materials which are actually available. So in terms of local communities, what we're doing is we're trying to create something. So if I give you an example, so here's a plastic bottle, and for most people you'll see a plastic bottle, but for me it's actually it's now a fly trap, and we can also, it's a hydroponic plant system, or we can actually create the SODIS method. We can actually sterilize water in it. We can grow plants. We can use it for all sorts of different things. We can create solar stills. We can do all sorts of different things. So it's fundamentally about using those resources, but it's about evidence-based thinking. So what I will always do with my students is I train them, say, I'm making a claim that this is what's happening, and I get them, they will all end up screaming at me, well, where's the evidence? And what I've actually found is that of all the different places I've actually done this with, Rohingya refugees, I've worked with Maasai, I've worked with some of the poorest, but also some of the richest kids on the planet, is that kids are kids. And it's not actually about the quality of education they've had, which teaches them to be how well they can solve problems. It's more about resourcefulness, and it's more about curiosity. And I do wonder whether in some of our education systems we're losing our curiosity.
You've been doing that program, obviously, particularly Sierra Leone you mentioned, but you've also thinking of recently developing courses to enable teachers to do the same thing.
Yes, that's right. I mean, I think kind of, to me, the joy of science is the curiosity and it's the discovery. And so I've got a hearing loss, so I actually left mainstream teaching about 10 years ago. But I have been teaching online and going back into it. And it's to me, it's not science. It's about, we can actually look at here's a wire. In an hour's time, you're going to tell me what happens to the resistance of the wire when I double the length, and an hour, having given them a recipe to actually go through, you discover, when we double the length, the resistance doubles, and it's trite, and we all knew the answer to this. And so I think fundamentally we need to rethink, and I've been doing some work with primary teachers particularly, where we're going on from this thing is, let's just look at what might happen if, and have this exploration of what might be happening. And if I give an example of something like, going back to the fly trap. So here's a fly trap, I can make it in 10 seconds. But what bait should I put in it? Where should I put it? What color should it be? It's a multivariable problem, and in so doing so, it's actually difficult to find out things from it. But it's messy, and real science is messy. Real life is messy, and science in a classroom isn't messy. It's straightforward, but it's also, there is no discovery. With this, a kid in Sierra Leone could discover something no one else knows, and that to me is the excitement of it, and that's, to me, what we've lost in our mainstream classrooms, where we know what the answer is going to be, the kids know what the answer is going to be, and we just go trudge through a process. And the students, quite interesting, the studies found that, that students still love science, but they don't love science lessons. And that suggests to me we've done something, we're missing something. We've gone very, very wrong somewhere. And of course, there's that study of Breakpoint and Beyond, where you can actually look at Breakpoint and Beyond, where they looked at divergent thinking, how good people at coming up with alternative solutions to problems. And I'll give you an example here, is how many ways can you think of to make a teabag fly? And if I give this to young children, they come up with loads and loads and loads of different ways. As we get older, we become fixated. We've got fewer ideas which come out of it. And that to me is that curiosity, that we've destroyed that curiosity. Breakpoint and Beyond found 98% of 4-year-olds were geniuses at divergent thinking, and they followed them through the school system. So aged 8 to 10, there were 30%. Aged 13 to 15, it gone down to 10%. As adults, it's 2%. And you think, well, how can we start with something and then lose it by being educated? And that's the kind of drive to me. That's the thing when we go, right, well, what are we aiming to do here? So part of what I'm trying to do as well is actually say, well, imagine that all we're trying to do is every child who comes and sits in front of you go, right, I'm going to train you to be an astronaut. And I saw somebody who talked to a woman called Susie Imber, and she was amazing. And she'd gone through an astronaut for a TV thing of 10 people down to one of being an astronaut. And it just struck me that every single skill that they kind of developed on that was what we should be developing with the students. This ability to not fear failure, this ability to actually learn from things when things go wrong. And we do have so many children, and one of the roles I had was working with as a gender balance officer for a national charity, which was looking at why do girls not choose physics. And an awful lot of that came from a fear of failure. And what we found was that the gender difference of boys would actually see a challenge if you gave them an open-ended investigation, like, well, what's going to happen here? I mean, I wouldn't say they would carry it out better, but they would see a challenge that they could, if it worked well, they could actually gain their status. But to a lot of girls, they saw a tripwire, something that, I might fail at this. And if I might fail at it, then the best thing to do is to actually not do it at all. And so what I'm trying to do is to create something, to create fearlessness, to create something where we go, you know what, fearlessness is not being brave, it's feeling the fear and doing it anyway. And that fear can be not necessarily dangerous, but that fear can be putting yourself on the line. So it's that fundamental shift from science being something which is about facts, being about, this is facts, this is what we know. I remember we were talking to a teacher in Jordan, and they're saying, the kids in the class say, well, what's the point in doing science, because we already know everything. And it's like, that's it's this idea that scientists either know everything or they don't know anything. And it's about how can we combat that? So that's what I work with teachers. And I've created some courses online which try to actually open up the minds of teachers to different ways of doing things.
Can you think of some success stories, maybe particularly at your experiences in Sierra Leone, of how the rubbish science program has worked and has enthused those students that you experienced at Sierra Leone?
I think in terms of success stories, there are some key ones. But if I start with a story of a failure, and I'll put an image of this child up later so you can see. and I was working with Rohingya refugees in Malaysia. And this was right at the very start of the rubbish science. And rubbish science was kind of, I did some voluntary work in a school in Nepal. And I looked at the science department, and in the science department, they had a ball of string and a piece of, and a pair of scissors. And it was like, well, what can I do with this? But I went downstairs and I found a juice carton, an empty juice carton, and some plastic bags, and I made a pinhole camera. And so I gave it to the students, and the students were like blown away. They were absolutely, it was a rubbish pinhole camera. It was really very, really poor. But they were blown away, and they were like, oh, wow, look at this, wow. And then they started asking, well, what happens if I made it bigger? What happens if I made it smaller? And it struck me that, you know, there's that key term which comes over and over again. What might happen if that's what I was trying to provoke. And so that's kind of starting. And then, so one of the very early sessions I did in rubbish science, I did it with the United Nations, you know, HCR, with some Rohingya refugees. And there was a girl, and she did a, you know, we do the thing about, you know, here's a fly trap, and we do lots of other things as well. I'm just concentrating on this because this is like what's the simplest one. And the thing about it, we try not to show them a possible all the solutions, because if you do that, then they will actually all create the same thing. So she decided that, you know, so here's a fly trap. She decided actually, you know, in Malaysia, it rained so much that she didn't want to have a funnel fly trap because it would get full of water. And she's 11 years old, this girl, a refugee. And didn't want to do that one. So what she did a side entry trap. So she actually got a hole in the side of it and put a side entry trap like that. Then she found that things weren't really going into it. So she actually needed to put the bait. Instead of having the bait at the bottom, she needed to have the bait. So she did something which was one of the other activities, which is you can turn plastic bags into fishing lines. So if you actually take a strip of plastic and twist it, put it really, really slowly, it turns into a fishing line, which is how you make Dyneema. And so we'd done this already. So she hung her bait down in front of the actual, and she found that was working. But then she found flies were going in and coming out again. So what she then did, she actually coated the whole of the inside with glue. So when the flies went in, they got stuck. And she's 11 years old, this girl. And to me, this problem solving was brilliant, absolutely fabulous. But she was living as a refugee, and so at the time they had no passports, they had no right of abode, they didn't have any United Nations. They had a United Nations card. There's no passport. There's no way that she could actually work anywhere. No country that she could go to, and she was probably going to be married to someone. And what we've lost is a brilliant scientific mind, and that to me is absolutely insanely criminal. And so that was one of the drivers, was to say, well, and it was still lots and lots of developmental work to do here, but how could we give a forum to these people? How could we stop these brilliant minds dropping through the net and disappearing? Because they are just as good, if not better, than our educated ones. They just have a lot less privilege. But in terms of some of the success stories, what I'm trying to do is when I go back to Sierra Leone, is to fit this up, because on the dump we've got the Ebola virus orphans who actually live on the dump, and it's a vision of absolute hell. It's you go to the dump and it's all on fire because they don't have any way of recycling the plastics. These kids, I mean, coronavirus is horrific and the pandemic's awful, but Ebola's absolutely hammered these kids. So you've actually kids who 3 or 4 years ago were going to school are now orphans living on a dump, searching for stuff that they could actually make, find, to sell. And so what I'm doing is setting up a program there where we set up like a little nursery to try and get them started. And the idea obviously I was going to come back and keep it going, but it's been, obviously things have been very difficult. But what I was aiming to do is create they're called keyhole gardens, where you actually create keyhole gardens, and in the middle of it is a pile of compost, and you put the compost in. And they're originally used for AIDS, people with AIDS, who couldn't bend down, but they found they're incredibly efficient ways of growing food. The aim of it is to actually create a scientific facility where we can actually look at those keyhole gardens, get it run by the actual orphans themselves, and with visiting scientists, or we can actually beam them in because they can access it by mobile phones, where you're actually having some of the best scientists in the world communicating with these sort of the poorest kids on the ground, and saying, right, how can we make that garden more efficient? And that's the whole thing about rubbish science. Everything that we create, we can modify, we can make it better. And the more knowledge you have, the more likely you are to make it better. But it doesn't actually matter. You give it to a 5-year-old or give it to someone with a PhD, and we should expect the PhD to get better results, but that's not often what happens. And it's this level playing field, this one where it doesn't matter how much money you have, doesn't matter how educated you are, you could still discover something new through one of these activities. So that's the aim of something. But obviously our pandemic is putting everything on hold.
So Neil, you're clearly passionate about your science. What inspired you to start a career in science? Was there a seminal moment in your early life, your early childhood, that got you into science? Was it a growing thing in your life? What got you into science in the first place?
I think partly it's quite interesting. It's actually look at the evolutionary psychology of what happens with younger children. And nobody in my family was a scientist. And so I didn't have a great relationship with my sister, and my father was massively into history. So it was like, I'm going to do something different to you. I think that was part of it. But I was born in Trinidad. I grew up in the West Indies, and had a pretty feral existence, where I used to go down to Mango Drain, and it's called Mango Drain, and we used to poke snakes and scorpions and chase things away and catch these incredible tropical fish. And I only discovered at the age about sort of 5, 6 or so, and I only discovered a few weeks ago, my parents never actually went down there. My parents never saw it at all. And so I did this wonderful thing of looking at ecology from a very exciting perspective. And then my parents moved from Trinidad to Grimsby, and it was like I'd never forgive them for this, really. But things kind of very got compressed there, and I think that but my grandparents had a farm, and so I lived on a farm, and it was farming to me as science, and we have this kind of I hate these barriers between science and the real world. And so there was this real joy of looking at the farm. So I had this farm thing as well. But I think partly I had a teacher, as Mr. Palmer, Mr. Woodward, I had a brilliant physics teacher and a brilliant biology teacher. And the physics teacher, he used to leave us confused. Like every single lesson was the lesson where we're like going home, going, oh, I'm confused about this. And I went to see him about 10 years later, probably. And I said to him, you know what, I'm not scared of confusion. And I think in terms of setting up somebody as a scientist, it's this idea that, you know, we know everything. Actually, you know what, as soon as I know something, I'm not interested in it anymore. It's gone. I'm not interested in that at all. I'm interested in what I don't know. And I said to him, you know, you really set me all up for that. I've really, you know, and I'm really, really grateful. And he smiled at me and he said, but you know what, I don't do that anymore. I said, well, you know, why not? And he said, well, as soon as I do that, I get all these letters from parents going, how can you expect them to answer these questions when you haven't taught them it? And so I think that becomes something which we've lost again. I think we've lost that idea. And we have this kind of idea within lessons. And I think certainly within the UK system, we've got inspectors coming in. And if at the end of your lesson, your students are all confused, that's not deemed to be a successful lesson, which to me it is. It's deemed to be a failure because we're supposed to actually wrap it all up at the end of the lesson. And when we look at all of these series, you know, the Game of Thrones or the Breaking Bads or anything that's really captured people, at the end of each lesson, it doesn't end. It doesn't end and everyone goes, oh yeah, I understand everything going on. It's that constant thing of newness, like what more is there to learn here? What more is there to learn? And that to me, I've always had that, and that to me is an absolute joy in my life. This thing that every day something fascinates me. And I put that down to this, what might happen if, because I'm always poking stuff still, always pulling stuff apart. What might happen if? And normally it goes horribly wrong, and then you go, oh dear, I now have to try and fix up what I'm done wrong. So,
Neil, you come across as very passionate and clearly passionate about the importance of good science communication to raise scientific literacy. And clearly Rubbish Science aims to address that, particularly at the student level. Apart from the ground roots of starting with the students, do you have any ideas in terms of how we can combat some of the illiteracy that's in society?
yeah, well, what I try and do is to do with the students. I mean, one is to actually know, well, what do you know? Like, what do you really know? What do you actually know? So I will turn up. I do ride a motorbike, so I actually turn up to talk to students and I've got motorbike gear on. I've got a helmet, and I said, I'll say to the students, how do I get here today? And they'll go, oh, on a motorbike. And go, well, do you know that? And they all go, and at least 70-80% of them go, yeah, we know that. Put your hand if you know that. Yeah, I know you came on a motorbike today. I go, no, what do you actually know? Because I've turned up, they hadn't seen me arrive on the motorbike. What do you actually know? You only know I'm wearing motorbike gear, you know, and it's like, so I then sort of say to them, right, well, what's the evidence? Okay, so there's a motorbike gear. Oh, here's a key, but what else? Give me an alternative viewpoint. What else might have happened? You know, or I might be a very careful cyclist. You know, they've come up with all these different possibilities to come up with, you know, well, they might not be the truth. And then a bit later on, I say, oh, by the way, I came on a motorbike today. And then I say to them, how many of you know are coming on a motorbike today? And still half of them will put up their hands and go, yeah, I know you came on a motorbike. I know, you know I'm wearing motorbike gear, and I told you I came on a motorbike. And I try and get this across to them and say, it's about evidence and it's about confidence. So I'm fairly confident you came on a motorbike because the evidence suggests I came on a motorbike. And it was great because one day I was just leaving and I got on the bike, put my helmet on, and some kids came running over and go, yeah, you came on a motorbike, didn't you, sir? You came on a motorbike. And I went, no, you only know I'm leaving on a motorbike. You don't know I came on the motorbike. And they were like, oh. And I think it's that all the time. It's what's the evidence? And I'll say to them, oh, look, you know, I can run faster than you. And then they go, how confident can I be about that? I have no evidence whatsoever. So let's create something. And if you're really young children, I'll actually go, right, we're going to race from here across the classroom. But I make them, they have to clamber over stuff first. And they have this massive thing about it's not fair, not fair, not fair. And so they have this really well built in evidence-based idea of testing and what's fair and evidence-based testing. They just don't actually see it as that. And so we go through this one and go, right, well, okay, so eventually we get to the stage, oh, we've got to run the same distance at the same time. So we run once, I let them win. Does that mean they're faster? Do we need more evidence? Oh, we need more evidence. Hey, that's how we build up reliability, is the more tests we do, the more confident we can be about it. But we're living in this post-truth. I mean, when we get to deep fakes, goodness knows what's going to happen when we just have no idea whether something's real or not, because we literally have no idea. We're just going to have to base it on trust, and who on earth do we trust? So that's the kind of way we're looking at it. This is the evidence. This is what we do. But I also try and put all of the science in through other activities. So I did qualify as a surfer, and terrible surfer. I just qualified as a surf instructor. So I could teach the physics of surfing, and we look at how does science relate to surfing. I did a project with Arsenal on the physics of football, and it struck me there that we need to look at how science is real. And so these Arsenal footballers are incredible physicists. They know how the ball moves in the air. They you know, you want to actually make it go faster or come off you. You use a hard part of your body to actually increase the velocity of the ball when it hits you, or you use a softer part, all these bits which can be very painful, of how to slow the ball down. And they all understand that, but what they don't have is the language of communication. And I think that, to me, is partly what we're doing with communication as well. And it's the same with rubbish science. We have this indigenous understanding. We have an ability to understand scientific principles, but we lack the standardized language. And I think maybe that's all we really do as scientists. We standardize the language to communicate these ideas. And then we can build on everyone else's ideas because we've got the standard to start with. But if we don't have that standard, we have these brilliant people in all different directions, but they can't communicate those ideas. And that to me is one of the big losses. And that's part of what rubbish science, or what I try and do as a science communicator. There's a really beautiful book somebody once gave me, and it's called The Starfish Thrower. And what it actually is a kid goes down to the beach one morning, and there's been a massive storm, and starfish are all over the beach. And so the kid goes out and starts picking them up and throwing them back in. And an old guy comes down and goes, there's millions of starfish here, and if the sun comes up, they're dead. And he's going, what's the point? Look at them, there's millions of them, they're all going to die. And the kid picks one up and goes, made a difference to this one. Picks the next one up, made a difference to this one. And that to me is what we do. We remind people, and we can't change everything. We can't change the politicians. And it was American US senator walking into a Senate with a snowball going global warming, look, and looking at this whole idea that a single data point you can actually take, you can learn something from. And that to me is what we're doing, one starfish at a time. That's it.
Yep, that's an excellent analogy. Now, let's say we've got students, maybe they're high school, maybe they're undergraduate, and they're thinking of a career in science. They're thinking of exploring science a bit further. What advice would you give them?
To me, science is just an utter joy. But science is done in the way it should be done. Science in school is not about discovery. There's nothing there's virtually no experiment your teachers have ever given you that to me tells me what science actually is. Every experiment they've probably given you, they know what the answer is going to be. You probably know what the answer is going to be. And so there's no curiosity, there's no joy in it. And it's a sad thing to say, is that, real science to me is all about discovery. And to me, it's a difference between riding an exercise bike and mountain biking. The science you're learning in the classroom is riding an exercise bike. It's giving you the principles, but you know what? It's not really very interesting. It's setting you up to be fit, so when you actually go outside. But when you go outside, you know what? It's messy, it's muddy, it's fast, but above all, it's exciting.
Neil, I'm going to give you opportunity now to teach us something that you want to share with us, something that if you were in a crowded room with in mixed company, you'd love to share and love to talk about. I think you've got something planned for us, haven't you?
Well, it's just a little thing, really, and basically it all comes from the tablecloth, the idea of the Pope's tablecloth pull, and whether it's real. And so if you actually Google the Pope's tablecloth pull, you'll see there's a little clip on Ellen DeGeneres where the Pope comes in and pulls a tablecloth. And I say to the students, is it real? And in order to determine whether it's real or not, what you actually do is you have to say, well, what does a good tablecloth pull look like? And so I'm just going to do a tablecloth pull for you. Just one moment, and I'll just put the webcam down so we can actually see this. And now fundamentally what we've got here, let's do it with a mug first. Now, if you do this, just like to say, you make sure you take your keyboard away and everything which could possibly fail. So if I pull it slowly, look, it comes with me. But if I just pull it like that, it's got to be loose to start with, and pull it down, it stays there. And the question is why? But that's not the real challenge for you. The real challenge is, supposing I actually take a pen. Okay, so this is actually going to be a big challenge I've got. It's probably not had time to set this up properly. It's not going to sit on there properly. How can you do a tablecloth pull where I take the paper away, but I leave the pen standing? That's not how you do it. There's a different way of doing it. That's your challenge.
In other words, you're not actually giving us the answer, you're getting others to work it out.
If I was to show you the answer, that would go against everything that I've been talking about.
Absolutely.
Your curiosity is actually piqued when there's a knowledge gap, when you go, how can I do that? I don't know how to do it. And if I don't know how to do it, I'm going to learn. That's science. That's story.
So if you're watching, I encourage you to make a little video of your attempt. That if you can make that pen stand, why don't you make the little video and then put a comment with the link to the video in the description. And it's your challenge. Neil, that's a great way. In fact, leave things open. I love it. Now, thank you for your time. Really appreciate your input. Before we go though, I want to give you the opportunity to plug Rubbish Science. Do you want to share something about Rubbish Science and how others can maybe support and contribute the charity?
Okay, well, I mean, one of the things is that Rubbish Science is kind of pretty stalled in a way. In that we've had the pandemic, with all sorts of, I've had lots of different situations in my own life that have changed dramatically. There is a course online that I've created, which means you can actually learn all the principles, and I'll take people through the principles. That should be up ready probably by the end of the week, and there'll be a link provided for that. Mainly what I've tried to create was like science ambassadors, so people who could actually look at these activities, and travelers, etc., or people who are traveling, going to different places, could actually do things where you can say, hey, look, here's a tablecloth pull, this is how it works, but you know what, this is, you know, I can make clean water from dirty water. So we can make solar stills out of plastic bottles. There's a wonderful one we can use, which is the SODIS method, which we are using, where if you put a plastic bottle in sunlight for 6-7 hours, the ultraviolet will actually sterilize it. But if you were to put that bottle inside another bottle, and then you use something like a crisp packet as a reflector, then what you can actually do is you can create warm, sterile water. If you look on the Rubbish Science website, there's a thing called a tippy tap, which then mounts the bottle in such a way that when you put your foot down on it, it will tip the bottle. And so outside toilets, for example, you in developing nations, you can actually create something where you can have warm, sterile water as a hand wash station, and you're making it out of 2 plastic bottles and a crisp packet, you know. And this to me is what we should be trying to do. So, if anyone knows of any funding, it would be fabulous to get some funding. But otherwise, if you do the course will be free. If you want to do the course, the main thing we want to do is just get it out there, because fundamentally it's about creating some water security, health security, and food security for some of the poorest people on the planet. But everyone can learn from it.
Thank you again, Neil, and certainly I'll put the links to Rubbish Science and the activities that he's spoken in the description. If you're listening to the podcast, go to my website, Physics High, and I will also provide the links under the blog menu. Again, Neil, thank you for your time, and hope we have an opportunity to speak again. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe to get notifications of up-and-coming interviews, as well as my other physics content. My name is Paul from Physics High. Till next time.